Hey, you guys, welcome back to Rocket City Yardstead. So, in the theme of holiday baking, I thought today we could make one of the things that my family has been making for the holidays for most of my life. I have this piece of paper cut out of a magazine. Who knows how old this is? I don't know when my mom would have clipped it. But the thing is cheesy artichoke heart appetizers. We love this stuff. It was the kind of thing that we would fix for Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, and super simple and really yummy, and just one of those things that's kind of a holiday tradition. And that's part of what makes it special because you only pull it out for the holidays. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated today because I need to make gluten-free crescent roll dough. If you don't have to be gluten-free, you can 100% just go to the store and buy the roll of crescent dough. And this recipe is even more simple. So we're going to start with our crescent roll dough. So the first thing I need to do for this is get a stick of butter going in my mixer here. We need to soften this up, cream it up, along with a cup and a half of cottage cheese. I'm using a lactose-free cottage cheese today, but just use whatever you need. I will say, I will share the recipe. I'll share a link for the recipe for this crescent dough below. I am making a double batch of this because one recipe makes about a tube of rolls. It's supposed to make 8 crescent rolls. And the recipe for our cheesy artichoke appetizer calls for 2 packages of crescent rolls. So doubling the recipe. But I will be sure to share the link for the crescent roll recipe down below. It has been several years, but I used to make these crescent rolls a lot, and we would use them for wrapping hot dogs up and sort of like pigs in a blanket. Okay, so I've got my cup and a half of cottage cheese here, and we're gonna get this blending with our butter. I remember the first time I saw this recipe thinking it seemed like kind of a weird thing to have cottage cheese in a crescent roll, but it's really good. So I just mix this until the cottage cheese and the butter are mixed really well together. And I'm going to bring you over and show you because the texture of the cottage cheese is significantly smoother now that it's been beating in the mixer. So here you can see the texture of the butter and cottage cheese in our mixer. And here you can see it in the carton of cottage cheese. And it's just a lot smoother now. Now that we've got the cottage cheese and butter all mixed together, we need to add our dry ingredients. This includes some sugar. I'm going with a tablespoon of sugar, 2 teaspoons of xanthan gum. If you're unfamiliar with gluten-free baking, this acts as a gluten replacement in your baked goods, especially for things that you're going to roll out. It helps. And we need 2 cups of gluten-free flour. I'm using the Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 baking flour. That's a gluten-free replacement. We also need 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. And finally, just 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And we'll get this all nice and mixed up together. Now that our crescent roll dough is all mixed up, we need to get it all wrapped up and put into the fridge for a couple of hours. So the directions as written are for making actual crescent rolls. And so I would probably, if I were doing that, make this, kind of just a round disc. But the recipe we're going to make with it, you put into a rectangle. And so I think to try and make things easier on myself when it comes time to roll it out, I am going to try and pat this dough out into a rectangle. So we're working with the shape that we want to be working with, if that makes sense. So here's our dough. I'm gonna get it all out onto this saran wrap. Just try and smush it down into a rectangle. This is one of those recipes that I feel like if you watch Roots and Refuge, there's a good chance some of you do. She talks about her family's sausage pinwheels that they make at the holidays and how they're so special, and it's about tradition. It's not about it being difficult. And while this requires an extra step for me because I need to make the gluten-free crescent rolls, the original recipe falls very much into that line of thinking. It's very easy, but it's the tradition of it that makes it special. Because this stuff really does come together very quickly once you've got your crescent rolls made. Trying to just make sure there's not a whole lot of cracks in it, so that when we go to roll it out, it's not cracked. All right, so here's our crescent roll dough, and this is gonna go in the fridge for 2 or 3 hours to chill and kind of set up, and it'll get quite a bit firmer than it is right now. And then we'll roll it out. While our crescent roll dough is chilling in the fridge, I thought I would get working on the topping for our cheesy artichoke appetizer, because a few of my ingredients need to thaw. Specifically, I guess 2 of my ingredients. Specifically, the recipe calls for green chilies, and it calls for a can of 4-ounce roasted green chilies like you would buy at the store. I have some from my garden. This is actually my last package from last year's garden, packaged up on 11/11/23. So I need about half of this package of green chilies. And then the recipe says it's optional that you can top your appetizer at the end with little slices of red pepper. Well, in my house growing up, my mom always used little pieces of pimentos on top. And so it was just like a nice little red festive topping. So I have roasted red peppers from my garden, and I'm just gonna chop some of these into little pieces that we can sprinkle on the top. But I need them to thaw out. And so I thought I should get going on that, right? But I'm just gonna get about half of this bag into my bowl here. And I love that we're in December and I'm using things that I put up over the summer, or last summer as the case were, maybe with that one. So my green chilies are in our bowl and they can sit there and thaw. And then I don't need a ton of red pepper, and most of this is still frozen really hard, but there's a little bit kind of off to the side on its own that I can pull out. And we'll put that in a bowl and let it thaw, and then I can chop it into little bits. Both of these can go back in the freezer now, and I'll use them at a different time. Grab a little bowl for our roasted red peppers to sit in and thaw. So I don't think it's going to be an issue to just add things to these green chilies. Once they thaw, we'll be able to mix everything in. So the first thing I need to add to them is 3/4 cup of mozzarella. I went ahead and shredded this up earlier, and I have some leftover for something else, so that's always nice. We also need 3/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. Ooh. Yep, there we go. 3/4 cup Parmesan. And then I'm going to get this cheese put away so I don't have to get another cutting board out. And we're going to chop up one 14-ounce can of artichokes. These have faced shrinkflation, and they're 13.75 ounces now. It's close enough. If you don't know, I'm in North Alabama. With the recent changes to growing zones, they moved me into, I think it's 7B? No, 8A. We were 7B. But if you happen to be somewhere in my growing zone or the vicinity of where I am, have you ever grown artichokes? I love artichokes and I would love to grow them, but I just don't know how they would do here. I do think it would be fantastic if all the veggies in this could come out of my garden, though. So that might be something to have to shoot for in future. Have the chilies and the red peppers and the artichokes. The last thing we need for our topping is some mayonnaise. The recipe is actually sponsored in the magazine that it was in by Miracle Whip, and so it calls for Miracle Whip, but I don't use Miracle Whip, and I don't normally buy my mayonnaise either. So we're just gonna make up a quick batch of mayonnaise here. If you've been around, you've probably seen me do this, but it's just so fast to do, and we can keep our ingredients nice and clean if we do it ourselves. And so we're gonna make our own mayonnaise. So we need a cup of a light flavored oil. I am using avocado oil. A light olive oil would work well here too. About a teaspoon of Dijon mustard. About 2 tablespoons of vinegar. I like to use white wine vinegar for this. A little bit of salt. Maybe a 1/4 teaspoon. And an egg. Then we can mix this all up. It's that easy, guys. And I didn't have to run to the store to buy mayonnaise. We'll just find a 1/2 cup measure. And we'll get our topping finished. Personal preference here, I do like to add some cracked pepper to this. It's not in the recipe, but I like the flavor. So we're gonna add it. Mix this all up. Try and get our green chilies broken up a little bit. I think that'll help them thaw a little bit faster. And then I will pop this in the fridge until our crescent dough is ready. But it's just nice to have all the components ready to go. Our crescent roll dough has been chilling for several hours now. And so I've got the oven preheating behind me. We're preheating it to 375. Now I am just spreading out some flour for rolling out our dough. I am actually gonna roll it out on this silicone mat and hopefully transfer it into the oven because we should be able to bake right on it. Because sometimes handling these gluten-free doughs is a bit tricky. So if we can use the silicone mat to our advantage, That would be my preference. Get our dough out. Sprinkle this with some flour. Start rolling it out. So we want this to be about 11 inches by 15 inches is what the recipe calls for. It talks about a jelly roll pan. I don't have a jelly roll pan. I know we used to have one back when my mom used to make this all the time. But for now, we're just gonna eyeball. I measured the pan, the silicone mat here, so I have a pretty good idea of about how big it needs to be. And again, if you guys don't have to be gluten-free, use the store-bought stuff. So much easier. But sometimes it's worth it to put in the extra work, to have those things that bring us memories. And I don't think they make gluten-free crescent rolls that you can buy in a can. I'm just trying to even it up a little bit as I go. I was going to say, I had my ruler out earlier. So I want to make sure we're roughly in the right shape. Need to be a little bit longer. And definitely a little bit wider. It should basically fill this whole sill pat. But I want to be careful about not having it go off the edge. It is not a perfect rectangle, but it's pretty close. So I'm going to get this transferred onto my baking sheet here. There we go. And this is going to bake for, let's double check the recipe, 10 minutes at 375, just the crescent roll dough. So after that, we pull it out and we top it and it goes back in the oven for more time. We just pulled our crescent dough sheet out of the oven after it's 10 minutes and it started kind of pulling up from the edges and stuff, puffing a little bit. And so now it's time to put our artichoke green chili cheese topping on here. Just get it all nice and evenly spread out, and then we will put our roasted red pepper strips on top. My green chilies also have a bit of red chili in them because sometimes my chilies get away from me. So those red ones will just add to the festive level of the dish, right? Cannot tell you guys how much I'm looking forward to eating this. We have not had it in this form in a very long time. I found a dip that's pretty similar, and so a lot of times we'll make that and eat it with like chips. But this is the way of my childhood. So now I'm just gonna dot little pepper strips all over it. I think that looks good. So this is ready to go back in the oven for another 15 minutes. So here it is coming out of the oven. Look at how nice and browned that crescent dough is. So I'm gonna let it cool for a few minutes and then we'll slice it up. Okay, you guys, so full transparency. I've been dishing these up and I think the silicone mat prevented the bottom from browning like it needs to, because the edges are beautiful, but underneath, let's see if I can do this. That one's not the greatest example because it's an edge piece. This one is probably a little bit better of an example. You can see it's still very blonde on the bottom. And so I am just gonna take these pieces that I've sliced up, put them on a different baking sheet that doesn't have the silicone mat, and cook them for a little bit longer. Hopefully the edge doesn't get too overcooked, but right now the bottom is definitely overcooked. Whew, and that's hot, but you can really see it on this center piece where it's just super doughy. We live and we learn, right? I thought that that was going to be a good idea to deal with the more fragile gluten-free dough, but it was not. I may have to do this in a couple of batches as well, but that's not a big deal. So I'm going to try 5 minutes to start and then we'll have a peek. So they got quite a bit browner, which is fine. They're not burnt or anything, but the bottoms look much better. So let's grab a piece and give it a try. It tastes fantastic. The dough is a really good substitute here. There is a little bit of a squeaky quality to it that I don't remember in past, but it's good. It tastes really good. It tastes like I remember. The texture is just a little bit off. I think in future, what I would consider doing is, number one, I would not use the silicone mat, but I think I might cook the base longer than the recipe called for before putting the topping on and let it get a little bit more done. Probably just another 5 minutes maybe, but because the edges, they're just like a crescent roll. So I think it's the part that gets the topping that just needs a little bit more time in the oven first. But like I said, if you don't need the gluten-free aspect of this, it comes out perfectly if you make it exactly according to directions. And I have never been able to find this recipe online, so I will type it up and put a link in the description box where you can print it out if you would like to. So thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you are having a wonderful holiday season. I hope you'll give this a try, even though mine I had a little troubleshooting I had to do here. But I hope you have a wonderful day and I'll see you next time. Bye.